Hello everyone, and a huge welcome. I'm Emily Gray from Mercury Musical Developments, and I'm delighted to welcome this wonderful panel, and hello to everybody watching. This is the 6th of our panel discussions, and this is Cultural Diversity Matters in Musical Theatre. Of course, a topic that's always important, but particularly pertinent right now. I'm really looking forward to hearing what our experienced and eloquent and wonderful panel have to say. So welcome everybody, hope you enjoy our discussion, and I'm going to hand over now to James Hadley.
Thank you, Emily. I'm James Hadley of Musical Theatre Network. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we hand over to Felix, just to let you know, if you're watching this live on YouTube, please do feel free to ask questions at any point. Just type them into the YouTube feed, the live feed, with the word question in capital letters at the start, so we can pass that on to Felix as chair to ask those questions of the panel. You can ask those questions at any point, and then they'll get asked to the panel in the last third of the discussion, but feel free to type them into the chat at any point you think of those questions. The format of the discussion is that Felix and the panelists will introduce themselves and talk a little bit about relevant introduction, and then there will be a general panel discussion for about half an hour, and then we'll sort of open to the floor of those questions from everyone watching live and have a wider discussion before concluding. So do type in those questions at any point, and we hope you enjoy the discussion. Over to Felix.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Emily. Welcome, everybody. I hope the next hour or so is going to be hour and a half. Yes, hour and a half is going to be enlightening, helpful, and vibrant. We like that with musical theatre. My name's Felix Cross. I have a varied history with musical theatre. I've written a number of musicals that have toured, played all over the place, and as a composer, as a playwright, and as a librettist, and indeed as a director. So that's all my fault. We have a wonderful panel with us, wide experience right across the board, and we'll come to each of them individually in a moment. The essence of really what we're talking about today is I've always been intrigued that as a musician, before I entered the world of theatre, I was just a musician, I found the notion of cultural diversity, or whatever it was called back in those days, it wasn't even a question. I was a musician playing in bands, and there were black musicians, there were white musicians. Most of the music we were played would be culturally from a sort of black position of some sort. And it was only when I walked into theatre that suddenly the issue of I won't say diversity, I'd say lack of diversity, suddenly came into play. I suddenly realized I was in this other world, yet I was still playing and writing music as my initial venture into that was concerned. This is over 35, nearly 40 years ago I'm talking about. And one would hope, and one would have hoped, that things would have changed somewhat. And indeed they have. We cannot deny this. But just as with these issues in the wider world have shown, they have changed and they've fallen back in some ways, and they've changed, but they haven't changed enough, or they have changed in the sense that they have morphed into another issue. And I'm hoping that our wonderful, illustrious panel will get to grips with some of these issues, and let's see what happens. So first, I would like to introduce Rachel Victor-Sampson, a writer and producer. And Rachel, I'm asking everybody this really as a way of introduction to talk about, Rachel, if you could talk about how you got into musical theatre and how you found it, and what you'd say your relationship with it is.
Yeah. Well, hi everybody, really glad to be here today. So I got into music theatre really only a few years ago, so I'm probably the newest person here in terms of music theatre. And it started off by me actually doing a music theatre diploma course as a mature student. And you know, it was a fantastic experience. But what I really noticed was this, that really as I think Felix was saying, your colour and your sort of culture starts to become really an issue again. And I noticed that I was really sort of stereo cast into particular roles, or if I wanted to try certain material, there'd be lots of things about, you know, not of casting types. And I'm like, well, what's all this about? I'm just coming to do my singing. So it started from there. And I think after that, I decided, well, I want to do some more, but I really felt like I wanted to be in charge of what I wanted to produce. So I started writing, joined BML, Book Music and Lyrics, became a member of Mercury Musicals, and started getting more involved in the music theatre community. So I would say I feel like I'm part of the new music theatre community, and I've got to meet many of those people. But also, I think what I noticed also being part of the new music theatre community is that it felt very much like much of the same. It felt like the same kind of material, the same kind of music. And people were very welcoming towards me, but I just felt there was a real lack of diversity in terms of the kind of material that was being made and being produced, really. And that's why myself and Mercury Musicals decided that we would put on this event, basically. So I'd say that's my kind of brief intro into music theatre.
Thank you. That's interesting. So essentially, you're saying it's your experience coming through. You're experiencing this sort of rather narrow band of types of music, types of subject matter, types of.
I think it's music and subject matter. I'd say it's a bit of both. Mm. So in terms of the material that I started to write, it required music from particular. Obviously, I'm from the Black community, so it was like African, but it was also Irish music, music from the Caribbean, and even contemporary music. And I kind of felt that many of the composers that I'd spoken to initially were lost, basically, by this. What is it she's trying to do? They understood the writing, but didn't really have a good grasp of the music and weren't quite sure how to do the music. They were all very skilled and talented. They just didn't kind of feel like, they didn't really understand the musical elements of it, basically, or how they were going to do it, basically.
Right. Samira, you've written a musical, Bollywood Rose.
Well, it's kind of still being written.
You are writing. You are writing. In fact, you're taking time off from writing it.
Don't say that. Julie's over here.
So how? Tell me how you got interested and how you got involved in musical theatre, which was obviously a route to the project you're working on now.
Well, I'm a writer from sort of theatre and television. And so I'd worked in the theatre space. My husband is who is our lyricist and composer. He's also worked in the theatre world, but doing music for other productions. And we had essentially the crazy idea of maybe working together. And so it felt like musicals were the sort of best way to sort of marry those two things together. So our first introduction was joining the musical theatre initiative that was run at the Theatre Royal Stratford East they had like an open calling, which ordinarily they don't really do. It's kind of like an invite only thing. But they had two positions that they were looking to fill. We applied with a very, very rough idea of what would essentially become Bollywood Rose, but it was very far removed from what it is now. But we applied with that idea, and that's initially where we were first introduced to musical theatre, which I think was great because Fred Carl and Robert Lee, who are the guys from the US who came over and taught that sort of summer school, if you like, are amazing and incredibly empowering, and really felt coming out of that process that we could do anything, that musical theatre was a form where you could play and there were no rules and it was all up for grabs. And we had a great time. I went back 3 more years after that, and yeah, that's essentially was our introduction to it, and then we just kept on working, I suppose.
And did you find with that, after that sort of, I take it that was the Tisch school?
Yes.
Yeah, that was very, very, very celebrated sort of series of courses that Stratford East had been running. I take it that that sense of freedom that you found.
I think that was
how did that sense continue as you went into, you know, the real world of starting to work in musical theatre?
I think initially there was just essentially a sense of play, and that you could try anything and do anything, and you know, and you were essentially experimenting, exploring. And then as we moved on, all our development essentially for quite a while was kind of independent. It was just literally ourselves knocking our heads together in a room. When you're doing that, again, you've got that freedom. Now I would probably, you know, fight Rachel for the mantle of being sort of like the new entrant, because I'm a similarly new writer. I feel I'm working on 2 musicals. They're both very much in development. I've had nothing on in the musical form. We've taken part in some concerts, and we've showcased some of our music and our songs, but we haven't had anything go on as yet. As far as I would probably echo what Rachel said in terms of people maybe being a little bit more unsure about our non-traditional way of approaching musical theatre. I know RJ also felt that musical theatre has a very particular sound, has a very strong sort of traditional heritage, and it took some real convincing for him to feel like, no, his musical voice has a place in this form. He's well over that now, so that's good. But I think when you are going into an industry where you see there is a certain kind of sound and a certain kind of story being told, you can't help but look at yourself and think, well, where do we fit in that? How do we fit in that? And who's going to allow us, if you like, to fit into that? So I can't sort of say that we've had necessarily barriers put up against us at all, but I would say that as yet, we've not necessarily had anything on. Although Julie would say, that's because you ain't finished anything, girl. So.
Well, good. Let's give Julia a chance to answer on this, indeed, because I'm interested, Julie, as indeed the producer of Samira's work in progress, shall we call it? What do you as a producer generally? You obviously you have an overview of what's out there and what's potentially out there. How do you, if you can sort of see it, possibly, I know you'll see it through your eyes, but if you can see it through the eyes of somebody who may not necessarily feel that musical theatre is for them, as Samira was saying, her husband sort of initially felt. How do you see the picture? You're switched off. We can't hear you.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was about to say, I love that you think that I'm that well informed about the general landscape, and I will do my best to look like I am. Okay. I think if the question is, how do you encourage and open the doors to more diverse voices in musical theatre? Is that the question?
That's probably the question after the question I was asking. Probably the question I was asking was a simpler one, which was, how do you see it? How do you see the world of musical theatre through the lens of diversity? How do you see that? Yes. How do you see?
I'll tell you my biggest issue, or one of my main issues at the moment, and this is a personal thing, is that I find myself very kind of stopped in my tracks by shows where I see a very diverse cast and I do not see a diverse audience. And that is probably one of my biggest bugbears at the moment, is that there are times when I've been in theatres and I am a white person, and it feels like minstrel show is the wrong thing because obviously it's not white people doing blackface, but at the same time it's like you're performing for us, but why is the us just white? That is something I have a problem with. And all of the thinking prior to this has made me kind of really question. You asked everyone how they got involved with musical theatre. I started as a performer. I was doing musicals from when I was in my teens with youth groups, and then I resisted it because I had this voice, but I wanted to be a Shakespearean classical actress and I wanted to be taken seriously. And I acted mainly in musical theatre, but I wouldn't say only one West End show, so not in with the in crowd in that sense. And then I moved away from it for quite some time. And what brought me back was being asked to perform with Showstopper. So we improvised musicals. I improvised musicals for 11 years. I still do. And that really kind of opens you to the structure and how the thing is created. But it comes back to the same thing. I know I'm going around in circles. It comes back to the same thing. If you don't see people who look like you, if you don't know that there are jobs available outside of being on the stage, but actually creating and writing and composing and stage managing and directing and everything, we have to start that early. So there are the things that we can do for our industry where we are now, but that has to go with outreach. It has to go with outreach into schools. It has to go with mentoring. It has to go with a lot of things. I've burbled quite a bit now.
No, that's very good. And you brought us into a different area. I mean, it's first off, audiences. I know this. For 19 years, I ran a black musical theatre company, and we were a national touring company. And because we were a touring company, the audience development was basically at the whim of all the venues that we played at. So we could do what we liked, put on all the shows, but actually we'd be playing to white audiences up and down the country because that's the way those theatres ran. But that's enough of me and mine, but I actually absolutely understand exactly where you're coming from there. Benjamin, so you've been involved both, now, am I right, both as a musical director and as a composer for theatre?
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, the work you did for Small Island, wonderful. All the scores there. What was your route into? I'm just wondering whether I can safely say musical theatre, or should I more say music for theatre?
Yeah, I think probably music for theatre is more accurate, perhaps. But I have been really lucky and been able to work on some productions as assistant MD for musical theatre. So I do have both bits to my CV, I guess, at the moment. But it's interesting. Like there's so many great points brought up already about access and also a really interesting point that links to how I came into it, and that was I actually had no idea that I could do it for a really long time, until I was asked if I could be part of Memphis, the musical. And up until that point, I just had no idea that was a job that was available to me, really. And so, having been sort of thrown in the deep end on that job, and sort of learn to swim just about. I think that's one thing that really keeps coming back to me is how little people know. People come from my background, having studied jazz or having studied any other type of music, how little we know about the jobs that are available in the theatre world, and how great those jobs are. I think if people really knew how great they were, there'd be a lot more people kind of trying their best to try to aim for it. And you got to study for it. It's really super high level of musicianship, So I think it's very true. I think it was Julie already said that getting in there early is one of those things that's really, really important going into schools and all that sort of thing. But yeah, so that was my route into musical theatre, and then into music for theatre was a slightly different path. Rufus Norris saw a concert I did with a band called Jazz Jamaica, who I played with for a long time, over 10 years. And just so happened that music, the music we were playing, which is jazz and ska, reggae, all of that kind of mixed together, that was what he was looking for a small island. So that was a nice little moment of good luck, really.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, that's extremely good. So I'm interested here, and I recognise exactly what you say, which is that for many artists who aren't in musical theatre, and we'll talk about that term, who aren't in musical theatre, for many artists, there may just be a complete unawareness of the opportunities that exist within it, and that there are so many possibilities. And you're right, and you're absolutely right also that the skill level, the technical skill level is extremely high. You can't muck about.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I think it's but I think the interesting thing there is you start to get the question, slightly moving the conversation on a little bit, but you start to get the question when you want to hire, for example, I think Rachel was talking about finding musicians or musical directors to do a certain type of music, whatever it may be. You get a lot of questions about can they do it, and that is a real. As a musical director who wants to hire musicians who maybe haven't done musical theatre before, that is a real big conversation to be had.
Yeah.
About because and in some way I think it's a real shame, and I think that's part of the problem that we have is that question is so big. Can they do it? Yes, of course they can do it. Maybe they haven't done it before, and maybe they haven't specifically studied to do it, but of course they can do it.
Yeah.
It's just about how to bring the musical theatre paradigm or music for theatre kind of way of thinking and kind of join up the skills that they have and make that work together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Allyson Devonish. So I know you work very much with singers. You work, but you also work as a musical director, generally in theatre. What was your way in to theatre? I suppose I'm asking this slightly disingenuously because you and I have worked together so many times. So let's pretend that we haven't. But yeah, so just tell me about your just the best bits.
The best bits. Well, my way into music theater was actually via you. You were being hired by Nitro. Was my first job with anything to do with music theater. I'm a classically trained pianist, and when I left college, I worked primarily with singers. So voices are my thing. And I think that probably one of the best things I picked up from working at Nitro and with you and all of the people who I came across was about the importance of telling our story and owning it. And it was something that Samira had said earlier about sort of showing up and both Rachel and being the new kid in the block and people seeming to wonder why you were in the room. And the horrible thing is that I'm actually used to that coming from classical music. Nobody ever expects to see me and nobody ever expects to see me play the piano. So showing up at other companies and doing what I do, the surprise actually is what I'm used to. That's an unfortunate thing to say. So I just get on with stuff and I do what I've been hired in to do, which is to musically direct people and make sure that they're doing it correctly and that they're delivering and communicating and telling the stories as best as they can. I think that having worked in opera for so many years, and I know you and I, Felix, have often spoken about the difference between music theater and opera, and I think ultimately both of them are telling a story. How they do it is, always up for discussion, but I like the idea of telling a story through song, and I think that what I have been doing and what I hope to continue doing is to make it easier for that communication to flow, to the audience. I mean, it's a lot of what almost everybody has said about expectations, about the audiences, as Julie was saying, and who we're communicating to, and also what Benjamin is saying about, you know, that horrible, I think, insane question of, can they do it? Well, you sort of think, well, they're a musician, so of course they can do it. It's just, you know, and the art of being a musician is being able to adapt to different styles and pick it up and continue with your sense of communication. So in the larger umbrella thing of what we're talking about with diversity in music theater, I think that, you know, there are, I would say the main difficulty is people don't realize that the door is actually there to be opened. You know, what happens when you step through is a whole different kettle of fish, but I think the myth of inaccessibility must be broken.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I must point out, I guess when I asked the question, how did you get into theatre, musical theatre, I actually did not realise that your first job was at Nitro, so it wasn't a sneaky way of me getting you to praise me for giving you the. Look, but seriously, there's really important things which connect with almost everything that everybody said, which is this thing of telling the story. You know, in the end, if we're not telling the story, if we're not telling our stories, then those audiences that Julie's aware of are not going to arrive. Those artists are not going to consider that musical theatre is a place for them, and all those other elements are not going to happen. No, we're going to sort of see whether the chicken and egg situation here, because, you know, do the audiences come? Does the work come? How does the work come first? And so on. And I'm sure we've all got lots of ideas. First, I want to ask everybody, starting with you, Rachel, I want to ask the big question, which is what change do we actually want? And this change, what does it look like? So if suddenly you've got the magic wand and they go, okay, whatever you want, what does it look like? And let's see if we can work a way of getting there. But anyway, let's just start with it.
So when I saw the question, I sort of thought, well, obviously the change that we want to see is, I think probably a broader definition of music theatre and what that actually means. We want to see stories and music that we can relate to. But I think the question that really came to me was more not just the what we want, but why we want to see it. Okay. I think the why is really important. I think UK, London, it's a very diverse country. There are very diverse people that live here. So why should they not have their stories on the stage? Why should they not be part of that sector? Why shouldn't they not be employed in that sector? So I think the why is really important, because it isn't just like, oh, we just want something, because you can want anything you want. But I think it's the why. And I think that music theatre has to catch up with some of the other sectors, some of the other subsectors, and the work that they are doing as to why they're doing. They're not doing it because they want to do it. They're doing it because they need to do it. And I think that's what the Arts Council and other bodies are asking for now. They're saying it's time to recognise you've had your time. Now we need to make the change. And the whole world is asking for it. It's happening everywhere. It's not just the UK. In the States, Broadway in America is doing exactly the same thing. They have a coalition going on over there. So they are also facing the same issues, though that's where music theatre is, you know, in full abundance. So it's why it needs to happen. I think we need to keep focused on the why. I know what I want, but why is really important.
That's good. And here, this is it. I want to turn to you for a moment, Julie. The why is interesting, but I'm interested in the broader definition of musical theatre that Rachel started with, and actually, if the rest of you can also have a think about this, it does occur to me, I must say, that in many ways, artists who are Black are often engaged in the sorts of things that if one was inclined to, one could describe as musical theatre. But musical theatre, the musical theatre world would not necessarily term it as that. Many, many Black artists are involved in music that has narrative, is performed very theatrically, there are stories there, and so on and so forth. So Julie, your thoughts about the breadth of musical theatre, and also maybe this issue on why do theatres need to rethink? Do theatres need to rethink it? Could theatres just continue with the same audiences they've got at the moment?
No, because they're going to die. I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, the theatre going audience is aging out. And the truth of the matter is, we all know we have to attract younger people. You've really made me think back kind of about what were my first encounters with musical theatre, because I wasn't a musical theatre kid, despite joining a kind of a youth theatre group and doing it for a bit. And the first musical I think I saw was Ippy Tomby. The next one I saw was Bubbling Brown Sugar. The one I saw after that was Dreamgirls. The one I saw after that was Serafina. So, and none of it was intentional. You know, I'm a North London half Jewish white girl. It wasn't a plan on anybody's part per se. But I think it's the same thing I feel about Mock the Week. Sorry to be really reductive. If I don't see diversity on the panels, I'm bored. Life is more fun. And what does it, and I know I have to preach to my people, and I will happily do that. But it's like, I'm not asking anyone to do this because it's worthy. I'm not asking people to do this because they should, although I do believe it has to be mandated. And I'm glad that the Arts Council is putting percentage on it. And I think commercial theatre needs to think about that as well, which is, I straddle that. But basically do it because it's brilliant. I mean, that's not hard. So I've had to question a lot of things recently. And one of them has been, how much work have I done personally to work out who is out there? And some of you I know, and some of you I don't. And I can't know everyone, and not everyone can know me. But I think I probably lost your question in there, Felix, and I do rabbit on. But basically what I'm saying is, let's just do this. The why, yes, I agree with you, Rachel, but the why should be taken as read now. This stuff has to change. We have to open the doors. We have to welcome where we have not welcomed for our benefit. It's a selfish thing, you know?
I would thank you, Julia. I agree completely. Samira, as somebody who's walking into this business, how do you feel? I mean, is there a sort of sense of trepidation, in the sense that I'm walking into something that is essentially this white ivory towered arena, or do you still have that sense of freedom that you felt at the Tisch workshops, and do you think, I suppose I'm trying to get you focused on, do you think that the world you're about to walk, or you're walking into now, is the kind of world that you want to be in? Is that the world you want to see?
Well, I want to be in it, else we wouldn't be sort of putting time and effort, and everyone knows how much time and effort you have to do to put into making a musical happen. It literally, you're wrenching your heart out. So it's not something that you enter into particularly lightly. And yes, so I absolutely want to be in it and be here. I do also think that I have a right to be here. I think people need to question for themselves. Anyone who says the contrary needs to question, like, who makes the rules anyway? Who gets to say what is and isn't musical theatre? Musical theatre is telling stories through music, and I can think of many different other musical styles that do that without having a musical theatre label, and being on stage and doing the jazz hands things. I think I'm not necessarily looking for someone's approval to tell me that the work that we're doing is a valid piece of musical theatre. I think although I have to say, earlier on, I did wrestle with that a little bit. Like, people would say things to me, and then that did I did get a wobble, and I did kind of feel, oh, you know, they obviously must know more than me. They obviously must be right. Maybe what we're doing is wrong. And, you know, we'd go around the houses and eventually come to the conclusion that actually, no, you know, our instincts are good, and what we're writing has worth. And I believe very strongly that it has an audience. If anything, I have a huge amount of faith in audiences and less faith in the gatekeepers and the people that is your route to that audience.
Okay, we'll come to the gatekeepers in a minute. Julie, you want to have a quick word before I get on to the others? You're switched off. You're still switched off.
I'm here.
Okay.
I was just going to say, Samira's an amazing writer. So whether she's working in television or whether she's working in theatre, she understands story. She knows structure. She knows character. So what more do you want? That was it.
Okay, fine. Benjamin. So look, to the outside eye, looking at your biography, you're, you know, well on your way to being right at the core of the established, you know, the establishment of theatre there. Is it a place that you think you would like to see change in the respect that we're talking about today? And what do you think that change should look like?
I think that's really easy and difficult. I mean, I think if you're in any place, you want to feel welcome. Anywhere you're working, you want to feel welcome. You want to feel like you belong there. And I think going into any new job or, you know, starting any new profession, if you go in as the least experienced person in the room, then there's going to be some nervousness about that. But, you know, I think all I can say is so far, people and places I've worked with have been fantastic, and it's been a really great atmosphere and environment. And I feel like, you know, I'm quite happy to be part of a change that's happening. I'm quite happy to see that people are thinking about it and trying to make that change. But you know, I think going back to a couple of the points that people made so far about you know, the idea of having more diversity in the people who make theatre, that shouldn't be a question anymore. That should be obvious. And for so many reasons, you know, it's more interesting. You get a better team, of more diverse points of view and influences, and all of this just gives you a more rich experience and hopefully a more enjoyable product and show. And that goes along with, for me, what we should be putting on and what musical theatre or theatre with music looks like. You know, because I think, as Samira said, it's about the stories, and I trust the audience, like she said, trust the audience to turn up to things that have a story that engages them, and that's what people are really going to turn up for. So whether that's the story engages them because it's telling the story of their personal family history, or whether it's just a really, you know, engrossing drama or whatever it is, you know, I think as long as we're reaching out to people, and I think you have to be conscious about the stories that you're telling in order to reach out to people. You have to be really focused on we're telling this story. How are we telling this story? Who are we reaching out to? If we want to change our audience, what stories are we going to tell to people to bring them in? You know, so I feel that should be the main part of the conversation. I'm sure it is, but for me, that's just really, really important.
Yeah. And Allyson, I mean, this comes back to the story, the heart of what you were talking about. So, what does change look like to you? This ideal, not the ideal world, the world that should be.
For me, change means that we wouldn't be having this discussion.
Well, yeah.
I think the thing that I feel like I've been fighting lately is how tired I am of having this discussion. I've been in this country for over 30 years, and it seems on an annual basis they're having this discussion. And it's a fight against, it seems like a fight against something that's so entrenched in that there's a sort of fear in telling stories that might seem unfamiliar. And I think that the changes, I guess, a relaxing of rules, and I don't actually want to use that word, but if it's about, for instance, what the definition of music theater or musical theater or theater with music is, will that allow for more different stories to be told? As other people have said, a change from the top down of the gatekeepers, of people who make decisions, so that it isn't so odd if somebody who doesn't look like you comes in with a story about their culture, and people don't have to fight to prove its worth or its validity. But I think ultimately, my theory is that if you're still talking about it, you just don't want to do it. Because if you wanted to do it, you'd get it done already.
Yeah.
So if we're still talking about it, we're clearly still banging our heads against some not so invisible wall. Otherwise, we just get on with it.
That's a very, very true point. Can I just say that I sat on the first, my first, it wasn't then called diversity panel, but let's call it that, at the Arts Council in 1981. And I've been sitting on panels ever since, and here is the latest iteration. So it's been over 40 years. It's been 40 years. So Julie, sorry, you had your hand up there.
I just want to pay a bit of tribute because these are not my ideas. I'm working with Arts UK at the moment. And the message that we're trying to get across to theatres, and this is Amanda Parker's work, is it isn't rocket science. It literally is. Number one, do unconscious bias training. Number two, put Black and ethnically diverse people on your boards. Number three, put training through the organisation so you're opening your mind. And actually, somewhere in the middle of that, I lost also, listen, make a space where you can listen to what people have to say. But I really take your point, Allyson. That was what kind of made me think, I want to just say this on behalf of Amanda, because she couldn't be here. But that feeling of we really have to have this discussion again. This discussion, as Felix has just said, has been happening for decades. So I want to say, and maybe this is not the audience, I don't know who's out there to say it to, but what I'm trying to say to my fellow producers, commercial, to the rep theatres up and down the country, to the fringe theatres is, it is not hard. Stop pretending it's hard. It isn't. It's really easy. Put 1% of every budget line item towards diversity and you will see how quickly things will change. So like I said, I am not attempting to preach the converted, but I am trying to say this to everyone that I come into contact with as much as I can. And I have my own failings as well.
Samira, yes.
Hello. I just wanted to add maybe two more things to the very fine list that Julie just gave. And that was essentially, develop and commission. Put your money where your mouth is. If you want to see the work, if you desire it, there's good stuff out there. You just need to commission it. You need to put money into developing artists to see their work come to fruition, or at least give them the chance, and even the chance to fail. Because often there's a thing where, you put your money into one project, and that one project has to do the business for everybody. It has to be more of an equal playing field. Artists are supposed to be allowed to play, to explore, to fail, to succeed. And so I think I would want to see people putting their money where their mouth is. Develop and commission. We, like myself and my husband's work, would not exist if it were not for the early stage development and continued development that we received from Rifco Theatre, which is an Asian theatre. It's a touring theatre company based in Watford. If they did not, if they did not show kind of initial interest in the very, very tenuous ideas that we came to them with, and put some money and time and effort into seeing those things grow, we wouldn't be where we are today. But we didn't have to then justify the authenticity of our story. We didn't have to justify our place in the world. We didn't have to justify that there is a commercial argument for it and that audiences will come. They knew all that. So it really came down to the work. And so that's all I would say.
There's a question now. This is a new question that's already come to me, which comes from that, Samira, which is, and I know this because, as I said, I've been involved in putting on musical theatre in almost from every position, really. Putting on musicals are not cheap is the phrase. And they are, of course, more expensive than straight plays, simply because you are adding extra artists to the process. However, I just want to put this out to all of you. Is too much emphasis being placed on scoring the big hit musical? That musicals are, in my experience, and I'm just wondering whether you feel this, musicals are seen as these things where if they're a hit, then they're successful. If they're not a hit, then there's been a failure going along the way there. And the successful big hit musicals, with a few exceptions, we know, of course, are big. They're big, they're expensive, they cost a lot of money. So coming on from what Samira was saying, where you say, look, just look at the potential for commissioning more smaller pieces. What do you think of the idea of the musical theatre piece as a smash sort of huge cast of 50 production, as being a way forward for the moment? And listen, we're talking about this particular phase where nobody's going to theatre anyway, but for the future, do you think it's about the emphasis of the musical having to be such an expensive item? Benjamin, what's your thoughts on? How do you're involved very much in the nuts and bolts of it. If I don't want to demean what you're doing, but you're seeing it very much there.
Yeah. I mean, I think I think a lot of the time you see huge musicals because who doesn't love a huge spectacle? Everybody loves it. Yeah. All singing, all dancing, show with all the bells and whistles. But I think you're right, and I think it ties into the whole development aspect of it, in that give people a chance to put on their show in whatever form, whatever sort of form is possible. Give them that space, and I think that's the beginning of the beginning of the change, and it's just giving the opportunities. I think that's one thing that we all agree on, is that the more opportunities given, the more you'll see writers of colour and performers of colour excelling, and you'll see it. It's just giving that space for it to happen. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's smaller productions and smaller budgets and just having a space to do it is really important.
Rachel,
I have another question. Sorry,
yes,
I've got a question, and maybe you can answer this. That's actually for you and Allyson. I was just really interested that you said that you've been on diversity boards for such a long time. 1981 is before I was born, so it's sort of
please.
I was taken aback a little bit, but no. My question is how, and it's kind of hoping to get a sense of how much things have moved forward, or if they have, or if they haven't since that point. I don't know if maybe we can answer that at the end, but it seems to me that I feel like hopefully there's a change happening now, but maybe with a longer term view, you can really tell if that's happening or not.
Yeah, I mean, look, theatre is the racism that exists in theatre is not like the racism that exists at football matches. People don't come up to you and shout in your face and throw bananas at you. it's much, much cleverer. And my very shortened version is, I walked into theatre thinking naively that I was walking in through the front door of this lovely theatre building with lights and everything, not realizing that actually I was walking in through a side door. And it was where all the black artists went into. And if you walked into the front door, that door had lots of other doors leading off it into all sorts of things. But when you walked into that side door, it was only a room with no other doors. And you were in there, and you thought you were in the theatre building, but actually you were in this annex. And that's what it was like then. I was a professional musician for many years. I walked into theatre, and suddenly I was a black theatre maker. Nobody had ever called me a black musician before. They hadn't categorized me as that. And I walked in through the black theatre maker door. That has shifted, but it's only shifted. It's not changed. It's shifted, and it's shifted. You know, nobody votes themselves out of a job. Gatekeepers will not change, and I'm not acting the part of a chairman at the moment. So I will pass this on to Allyson.
When you asked that question, the thing that came to my head, that what I noticed on the various diversity panels or events that I've attended was the extraordinary amount of hand-wringing. And the question that was always asked was, well, we change, but we just don't know where to find anybody. Where are the actors, the singers, the directors? And we don't know where they are. Do you know where they are? Because obviously we all hide under the same rock and only let out, two at a time. Has it changed? I think my observation is that there seems to be stronger kernels of people and groups and companies taking charge themselves and not waiting.
Yeah.
That people are making their own table because they just don't want to wait anymore. And I'm actually more excited about that. I think it's just my character, and I'm that ornery that I just don't really want to keep knocking on the same door to get the same answer. So I will do my thing with my people, and it will be good. And if you want to come and sit at my table, that's great. And if you don't, knock yourself out.
Yeah.
But I think it's unnecessary to have to wait for the scraps to fall off the table. I don't think we have to do that anymore. I think that's the change, incrementally, but I think that's the change that I'm seeing. Because as I said at the beginning, that we shouldn't be having this panel. We shouldn't be having this panel.
Can I just? Sorry, I was going to say, it's interesting. I've just been living in Australia for 6 years. I moved back to England a year ago, and 2 years ago, I was still getting calls from producers in England asking me, and I've been living in Australia for 5 years at that point, still getting producers asking me if I knew of black actors in England. It was just extraordinary. So we have spent a little bit longer on the opening question, perhaps, than I thought, but that's all good. I want to leap to the sort of business end of it, really. We know that change needs to happen. We're all agreed on that. We've even had a glimpse of what it might look like. What are the tools needed? What are the tools needed for change? I've heard the word gatekeepers a lot here. Producers, writers. What are the tools needed to effect this change? Rachel.
Yeah, I suppose I'd say suppose picking up on what everybody else has said, yes, there's change that you can do for yourself, right? So there's some of us that are that spirited enough and that determined that we're just going to get on and we're going to do it, and we don't need nobody to help and support us. But then I think there are those that are not necessarily that way. They're just not that way, and they need some intervention. And I think, like other industries, I think there are lots of examples out there, good examples that we can follow. I mean, film industry is one of those that have taken the battle on. They've written their own kind of diversity, agendas and protocols. You know, those are things that we can look at, which I think are already happening. I think other than that, as people that are actually working in the industry or trying to get into the industry, we all know that in terms of moving forward, it's about networking with different people. We talked about development support. I think that's, for me, obviously, as someone who's trying to write, that would be fantastic, basically, having more development support, and maybe, as you said, having even a kind of system where you can start off with, starting with something small and then build it up, and having almost like a kind of, it's almost like a kind of, how to call it really? It's like a business plan in different stages. So you might start with one, which is quite small, but then you have a kind of timeline thing that you can work on, development timeline. So I think development support is, for me, would be absolutely brilliant. More development support.
Yeah.
As a tool. Yeah.
Samira, what about you? What tools do you think?
I think the first thing is mindset. So those gatekeepers, if you like, need to have a willingness and a desire to see change. It's like, alcoholism or something. You have to note it, that it's something that exists. So I think that would probably be the first thing, and also want to change it. And then the second thing is just set targets. Set yourself a goal, set targets. That's what other industries are trying to do, some more reluctantly than others. But if you want to see the change, you need to set some kind of goal for yourself, and also a plan to achieve that goal. It's kind of 101 type situation of things to do here. If possible, that has to come top down, ideally, because then everyone else will fall into line. So if those, if the Arts Council, if the theatre venues, if the big producers are putting specifics as to what they want to see in their productions, in their schedules going forward, then everyone else will fall in line to deliver and supply to that demand. I don't see how it's going to happen bottom up. Like, there is already a groundswell of people and artists who want to do the work, who are good enough to do the work, and essentially just need to be given those opportunities. So those opportunities have to be created. And I think somebody mentioned, I think it was Rachel, that's talked about, the film and television industry. I've done a little bit of work in that area, and by and large, it absolutely comes from the top down. They're like, we want to see our productions with X number of representation. We want to see our writers' rooms with X number of representation. And that's how the job gets done. The people in charge need to just put hard and fast rules that that's what they want. And I just also want to say one additional thing to the question that you had earlier about musicals costing a lot of money, and what we should look for, how we should maybe temper our aspirations or our ideas for what we want to get on and how we can get those on. I mean, I do believe that musical theatre can exist from the very low scale to a very high scale. It's just like any other theatre. It can exist all the way along the way, to a one-man thing, to 50 people on stage. Great. But those musicals all up and down the line are getting made. So it's just an issue of giving some opportunities up and down the scale to diverse and cultural, heritage writers or creators, in theatre makers in every form. That's all there is to it. So I don't think we should ourselves try to limit our ideas, limit our stories, limit our aspirations, because we think we're more likely to get an opportunity if it's lower down the scale. Speaking from my own personal experience, like we went all out with a really big 2-act, massive musical. And Judy was the nutcase that decided that she was going to take that on. But then since then, our second musical is a smaller chamber musical. And then our third musical, which is it's essentially an idea stage that IJ's working on, but not me, is a one-man musical. So we've gone in the other direction. Now, take from that what you will, but I would say, you know, that the other thing is, what I would like not to see anymore is that colour equals risk. Musical theatre is risky already anyway. It's a big expense. But when you add creators who come from diverse backgrounds, for some reason people believe if you are a person of colour, you are more risky. That is just simply a fallacy. And if there is a change that I would like to see, I would like to see the eradication of that idea. If there is any risk, it's because they're not being given the opportunities and the experience that they need to develop themselves further so they can get on par with the big boys. But colour does not equal greater risk.
Yeah, good. Lots of issues there. Julie, I'd like to ask you the same question. What are the tools needed for change? But I'm interested in what Samira was saying about, look, it's not up to the artists to downsize or upsize or whatever. But actually, I completely agree with what Samira says there. I think perhaps, what do you think from a producer's point of view? And by producer, I also mean venue producers. Notion that not every single musical production has to be something for the big house.
But I think that's something that MMD and MTN have been promoting for some time. I think creating material that can work in off West End houses has been a focus for a while. And I think certainly if it's your first show, it might be helpful to do something smaller as you are learning your craft. Yeah. But there are people at different stages of their career. And also, even though it's intermingling much more than it used to, there is still a demarcation between subsidised and commercial sector. What the Arts Council can do and what I'm seeing happen in the reps that I've been speaking to recently, they are really getting on board. I mean, it's going to take them time to work through stuff, but they are absolutely starting to implement changes. When you talk about the commercial sector, the thing that I'm always left with is, well, I can put something on a Southwark Playhouse with a cast of maybe 10 in the main house, and it's going to cost probably around about £110,000, and I don't always know where to find that. Or I can put something on in the West End that's going to cost about 4.5 million minimum, and I really don't know where to find that without other producers coming on board to help, because most of us don't work alone anymore. Apart from, certain icons. And I'm also very mindful that I'm responsible for other people's money. So now I'm going to contradict everything I've just said. And the way I'm going to contradict it is, we like to insure ourselves against risk. And one of the ways we do that is we hire pop stars to write musicals when they've never written one before, which might be slightly reductive, but I'm going with it. We hire book writers who have a name in comedy, but have never written a musical before. We attach stars, or we adapt films that are titles that people already know. So I'm now working on a production, and I am as guilty of this as anyone else. I'm working on a show that is happening next autumn. It's co-pro with Tallower and other people that I don't want to say out loud yet. And my big issue has been, I would really like to attach just a couple of names, just to have a little insurance for my investors. And then I saw Turn Up London, and I thought I knew the black talent that was out there, and I was wrong. I was completely wrong. And I texted Michael that night and I went, I'm an idiot. Forget trying to attach names per se. Let's just cast the best people for the roles, and let's trust that the level of talent that's going to be on that stage is what people are going to want to see. I may be making a massive mistake, but you know what? If I am, it's my mistake to make. So that's fine. Does that answer your question in any way? Because I have two for me as a producer. One is a belief that I'm always right, and the other is a ridiculous amount of enthusiasm.
Well, there you go, and that's 95%, isn't it? That's it. Benjamin, what for you are the tools there And yes, what do you think happens in the, you know, in what can change the rehearsal room, for example?
Well, I'm not sure about changing. You mean changing the team, changing the creative team?
Well, maybe it's about diversifying the creative team. I mean, now we know that we can't impose laws to say, you know, this book writer must work with this composer and so on and so forth. But what can be done to encourage the breadth of vision, perhaps?
I mean, I think one of the most important things, and this may be slightly more long-term view of it, but I think one of the most important things, and it's a bit connected slightly to what Julie was saying, is that we actually need to create the talent. We actually need to start thinking about how to nurture the talent and create it. And what Julie's saying about putting somebody on who has the talent but doesn't have the name is exactly what I think needs to happen. And, you know, you give someone a chance to become a star, and that's what the change that we can make. That's one of the tools that people need to have. You know, it's one of the opportunities. And
but you know, Benjamin, that all my colleagues are looking at me like I'm cray.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, absolutely, I understand that, because if you had you know, a big star, then it's great. You've got like so many bums on seats already. Brilliant, fantastic. But yeah, I think obviously the risk part of it makes a lot of people nervous, and I totally understand that. But the risk that you need to take, and I think in some ways, you know, I was part of Turn Up London and was there playing and watching as well, and the talent is incredible. It's just incredible. And the depth of the pool of talent is huge. You know, there's so many great performers out there. You know, the band as well are all fantastic musicians. So giving those opportunities again is just so important. Having been recipient of the chance to do something that I'd never done before, and just being given that chance, it was absolutely huge. And that one sure was a risk. I'm sure there were some conversations about whether or not that should happen. So, you know, hopefully, yeah, being given opportunities and giving out those opportunities is so important. And part of that also is going to grassroots. And I think telling young people, you know, from Southeast London, from Lewisham, where I'm from, by the way, you could be a musical theatre MD if you want. You know,
yeah,
and that may be something that will blow a lot of young black kids' minds, and that's an important thing to do, I think.
Yeah, good. Allyson, I mean, I know that, of course, you are very much in the business of going out and doing it yourself. You know, nobody's going to do it for you, so you go out and do it yourself. With Nitrovox. What do you see that you would need in order to bring Nitrovox or any other project you may care to use much more centrally into the world of musical theatre?
I still feel that it's changes need to trickle down from the top. I feel that, you know, any approach I have made, either as an individual or on behalf of Nitrovox, that half of my energy is proving our worth. And because there's a sort of unwritten expectation that I won't be as good as solely because of the color of my skin, or that my group is not as good as because of the color of their skin. And I think that the risks that we're all talking about that should be taken, I think, are actually offered more to others than to us. And this is clearly my experience and only my opinion, but, you know, if half of the battle is basically pleading and saying, we're okay, we're just as good as the rest of them, and before you even get a chance to do it, that's a lot of energy wasted. I think, you know, music theater, the arts, period, this is a business. This is our job. These are jobs. And a business, if it needs to take advantage of a change in the wind, or to, you know, figure out a way to get more money and more audiences, more different audiences, if this is the way things are going, a business figures out what to do to make that change work for them. So if diversity is the flavor of the month and they want to make it work, then the changes, and they said, it's not rocket science, hire the people, because we're not all hiding under rocks. If you want your business to work and show that it's diverse and that these opportunities are going out there and they're taking risks with, different styles and peoples and stories and so on, then just do it. It's not that difficult, and it's how you can expand your business, expand and grow this particular kind of business.
Okay, good, yeah. Look, we've overrun a little bit. This is the section where I'm going to pass on questions to you from our audience. I've got some here, and the first one is a question really about casting. It says, regarding colorblind casting or blind casting, should roles be completely open to interpretation while casting biographical musicals, regardless of the authenticity of the history musical styles? Look, Rachel, what do you think? What do you think of that? I mean, obviously, we're looking at things like Hamilton, and there are a number of musicals that are about people who really existed historically. What do you think of that?
What can I say? I mean, I think in some cases, yeah, I think it can work. And I think in other cases, it depends how much it takes away from the story. So if you're telling specific stories about specific people, I think it can confuse the audience if they're, say you're talking about, I don't know, it could be somebody from, I don't know, from the Indian community, and then you've got somebody playing a part of an Indian who's not an Indian. So I think you have to choose where that can work. I think there are cases where it can work really well, but I think it just shouldn't be just to prove a point of being colorblind. I think no, I don't think every show you have to do that.
Yeah, look, I'm going to open this one up again to everybody, so we don't just go around. But I would just throw in the fact that I suppose if you're going to say it's going to be a sort of a mainstream, Churchill the musical, and you're going to cast Idris Elba, presumably you're going to do this because you're making a certain comment, just as you did with Hamilton. You're making a particular comment. The actual production is making a comment in itself. I don't know if anybody else got anything else to add on that. Otherwise, I will move on to the next question. Next question. The West End, we know, is dominated by a select. No, this is the question. This is not coming from me. The West End, we know, is dominated by a select few white males. How do I, as a young mixed-race musical theatre writer, ever hope to aspire to a world which seems unimpeachable, unreachable? I feel for you. But this is the core question in many ways. Who'd like to give it a first go?
I mean, I could just anything I could offer is words of encouragement. Basically, I just think it's not an answer really to a question. It's just to say keep on doing what you do in the best way that you can do it, and be excellent. Be excellent, and that's as much as I think you can do. And there's also there's lots of ways to meet people who make the music and who hold the keys. Sorry, make the theatre and hold the keys. So all those things that I'm sure you already know how to do, networking and meeting people and building professional relationships, is all really important. So
yeah. I mean, I would add that it seems like an extremely high mountain to climb when you're at the bottom, and it seems an unclimbable mountain as well. But sometimes there are doors into sort of affiliated things. So you want to be the writer of a hit musical, but sometimes you could be you know, an assistant on a small workshop project. Sometimes you can be helping on all sorts of things. And if you work well and you are, you know, I mean, I hate to say this in this sort of way, but I've got to say my experience does tell me this, and my experience of a lot of people I've worked with, you know, if you work well and people who you're working with kind of, the next time they have a project, they go, that person was really interesting. That person was great fun. That person, you know, wasn't grief, basically. You know, we might have another job, and it might not be, again, the job you want, but suddenly you've done 2 jobs in the business. And it's sort of, it's not like being a banker or being a teacher where there's a clear pathway through. Of course, there's lots of other pathways to get through as well, but this way you can end up being the writer of a musical theatre piece, a successful musical theatre piece. You can be an established writer. You can make, there are so many routes there, and they're all, each person has their own story. I'm sure, you know, we all have our own stories of how we got to where we are and where we're going. There's no single route. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything to that.
I just wanted to say, you know, it's not you. Like, the rest of the industry is catching up. It's not you. So you're just waiting. If you want, you can wait for them to catch up with you, or you can just do you and do it to the best of your ability and create the work as you can create it with all the resources and the people who you know. And if you don't know anyone, make those connections, but you do you with what you can control. You can't really control whether some, you know, a big benefactor is going to come down and say, yes, I anoint you to come in. Here are the keys, enter my palace. Just don't assume that's going to happen. Just, you know, just go and carve out your path is and make your steps, however small, but hopefully frequently, towards that goal. And the other thing I would just say is that, you know, if you can make a small part of success in your own world, people will come to you. If anything, everyone wants, you know, wants to build on the success of other people. So if they feel that if they sniff it, they'll be coming after you. So I would just say, just concentrate on you. There is no fault with you and about the drawbridge being up. Mate, you know, just do you, and they'll come to you. That's
very, very good advice. Yes, Julie.
I would also say, be really glad that you're doing this now, because I know who are my age who have been doing this time and had the doors shut against them, and they have forged the path over and over and over again, and it has been so hard. So I hope my door is open. I hope other people's doors are opening. I'm glad you're doing it now, because it's been hard and not for me.
Absolutely. Look, just before I get to the next question, I just want to say to my panel, and also to everybody out there, for about 10 minutes before we finish, which we're almost entering now because we're running horribly behind time, I just want to, if people have ideas or answers to the question, what is the next step, or what are the next steps? So I'm now, in fact, going to move on to the very next question. We're going to answer these last questions fairly quickly. Although I've just been given a signal to say we can go over time a little bit, unless anybody's got to dash off to an opening night. Ha ha ha.
I actually do.
Sorry about that. Okay, so look, the third question. Do you think there is almost a fear within the industry to approach diversity with honesty and openness? Do you think there's almost a fear within the industry to approach diversity with honesty and openness? Allyson, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think.
And what is that fear?
Yeah.
What is the fear?
Because the fear is that you'd have to acknowledge that there is an issue with difference, that there's a fear that if a risk, and that's in quotes, is taken to move away from the traditional, it might not work out so well. And I think that, you know, I kind of see it as like, I don't know, dominoes falling. If one does it and it seemed to be okay, you know, approaching diversity and taking steps, changing gatekeepers, taking risks, not taking risks, hiring people. If one does it and it's okay, then possibly others will go, oh, look, they didn't fall over, nothing's blown up, you know, the world's still turning. We could do this too. I think, like, done it before, and they can't see anybody else who's done it. Who wants to be the first person to take that leap? And I'm even saying leap, and it's not a leap, but let's keep using leap. The short answer to that question is yes. Yeah, I think there is a fear.
Yeah.
In the industry.
Yes. Yes. Benjamin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that there is a fear, and it's a fear that's sort of based on, like Allyson said, on difference. And I think that one of the most important things to recognize is that there are cultural differences, and there's a cultural difference between Black British people and white British people, and there is a cultural difference there. And actually, what is important is to go into that creative situation, bringing everything that you have and everything you love about your culture, and seeing how that all works together. And I think that's what people are slightly afraid of, is that how will that work out? What is that? And they're slightly afraid to just acknowledge it and be like, we're different, but actually let's see how this is all going to work together. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Julie.
We're scared because we're wrong. And we know we're wrong, and we've been wrong for a long time. And nobody of my complexion, well, nobody anyway likes to feel wrong. No one likes to feel like they've misunderstood or had bad thoughts or been unconsciously biased or what have you. But the truth is we are. So instead of trying to put all the energy into defending against whatever, how about we just put the energy into holding up our hands and going, yes, we kept the doors closed because we're scared that if we open them, we'll fuck up. Sorry, bad word. We're scared that we're gonna be even wronger than we already know we are. And it's not gonna be fun to be told by people things that are true that we don't want to admit. But if we could just get over that, the pushing away of having that experience is causing more pain and more heartache than just fessing up, standing up and dealing with it. And that's part of how you open the doors. And that's how I feel about it anyway.
Okay. Yeah. Good. Rachel.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've had this issue in sort of so many areas, really. You know, this is an issue. I mean, music theatre is no different to really any other sector where we've had issues with racism, inequality, and all the rest of it. And usually it's to do with a loss of power. You know, people sort of hold these little spaces for themselves where they can put themselves up as supreme. To me, I think it's people holding on to power. That's why they haven't let go of the power. So the fear that they have, I think, is loss of power, because otherwise you would let it go and you would invite other people in. But I think people are holding on to that, and an industry that is quite hard to get into, where there probably are quite few jobs at the top, they want that power for themselves. So no one's going to gladly say, oh yeah, you can have it. Yeah, why not have it? No, that's why I think they're holding on, basically. And they will hold on until they see it's really not financially viable. So I think to a great extent, there will be an extent of being forced to make change, because when audiences say, we don't want this, they'll have to make the change. And I think it will, for some people, it may have to actually resort to that, where actually the people actually make the shift and say, actually, no, we don't want this. So we're not going to go and see it, basically. Yep. Because a lot of the money, if you think about West End, it comes in through tourism as well. So it isn't necessarily all UK bums on seats. It's, you know, international visitors that come to look at theatre and put a lot of money into it and pay a lot of money for very expensive tickets.
Yes, of course. That sort of, as as you say, so it comes back to, I think Julie's original comment about the audiences. It's the audiences, but also I'm very much struck by, Benjamin, what you're talking about. Especially essentially embrace the differences that are there. So much of the arena of diversity, the arena of the discussion of diversity, so much of it is clouded over with a sense of guilt, and people not wishing to come into the discussion openly because there's this world of guilt washing around. There's this fog of guilt, and I think, Benjamin, I would completely agree with you. Guilt is not part of the question. Let's put that away. That's something else. It's about acknowledging people are different and there are differences, and that's what's really exciting, folks, about this, because, as Allyson had said, this is a world we're in which is all about stories. And do we really want to hear the same story over and over again, told by the same people? Maybe we want to hear different stories, and there are different audiences for different stories. There's a interesting question here. Is musical theatre a form of escapism and ideology of the world for its predominantly white audience? Can it work? Should it work? Act as a true representation of our population? So there's two questions there. That notion of musical theatre as a form of escapism, which we're all aware of, that sort of accusation, if you like, or that. So that's one part of the question, I think. And but the second one, can it be a true representation of our population? Of course, the two questions overlap a lot. Who wants to start with that one? Samira, I'm looking at you. There you go.
I was going to go anyway.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I was very quickly and easily say yes. Any piece of fiction is, whether you're consuming that from, a stage as a piece of musical theatre or otherwise, on a television screen or whatever, you're being transported into another world. So, of course, it's an escapism. Whether it's escapism for a predominantly white audience, well, obviously, if the audience, I suppose, is predominantly white who are coming into those theatres and experiencing that world, then yes. But should it represent our population? I would have to say yes. I mean, what's the argument for it not? I mean, it seems really simple, but that's what I have to say.
Well, I suppose one question, just something there. I can remember going around the country many years ago, having this discussion with lots of theatre people on behalf of the Arts Council and with the Arts Council. And there were many theatres in parts of the country who just said, yeah, love it, but that's not our audience. That's not our audience. In the part of the world that we're in, that's not our audience. That's not our population. What's the argument then, do you think?
I would just sort of say that presupposes that the audience that they're talking about only want to see stories about them on stage. That you can't, you're just using, I'm assuming, race as a reason to say that you're, predominantly white audience in a theatre in a small area doesn't want to come and see a story about a Black woman in the Caribbean. That you are making a judgment there based on what you think your audience's tolerance, if you like, for stories or the breadth of those stories are. I would say that is that. I mean, that just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, quite clearly. I'm just gonna diverge a little bit, right? So
you're allowed to.
So me and my husband, my husband really has a band, and essentially that band is called Botown, and they take Bollywood music and they reimagine it with a soul funk kind of vibe. And they're called Botown, and they've been going for 10 years. And we tour to all those theatres that you're talking about, and do very well. Thank you very much. So, and also that music is in Hindi. Like, I don't even understand it, but but the audiences come out and they watch it. So it's like, I can't, there would be no way anyone could convince me otherwise, especially when I've seen that we've gone into very small theatres and very out of the way places, and audiences have come.
So that's a lovely example. So you're sort of saying that that band can go to, and I won't mention any of the theatres in any of the places, do a one night gig there, sell out, and then could come back to the same theatre and say, we've got a musical featuring the same type of music, but it's got a story, and they go, oh no, we couldn't find the audience for it.
Yeah,
exactly.
Now that's Rachel. Go on.
Just a quick point. I mean, I think it's like any business that you have, right? You're going to work out who you want to target. So when everybody, you know, all these theatres, they have business plans, and within that, you set out who you want to target and your messaging. So it's not to say that the audiences don't want it. You've already shaped your audience. You've already picked who you want to pick, and then you start to say, oh, the audiences don't want it, basically. So I think those arguments, you know, they need to be challenged on what they're saying. At the end of the day, you have planned, you know, it's all a plan. You don't just go into business and do whatever.
Yep.
You know, it's strategic. You plan, you have a communications plan, communication strategy, you have all your channels, and you know who you want to pick. And you can speak to people like the audience agency who tell you how to do these things really well. So it's just an excuse, just touching on what Samira was saying.
Yep.
I would just only add to that is that if sometimes some theatres decide that they see your success in terms of what you've done at other places, and then they program you thinking that that's all, you know, that's going to fix all their problems, and that one show there's going to be a stampede of audiences coming to see that show. It's not that. It is an ongoing development that has to start with the venue and continue. It's not going to be fixed with the programming of one show.
No. I remember being in a specific town where our show was going there, and they phoned me up saying, we're not selling tickets. And I, you know, was saying, okay, so I'll come up there. I'll, you know, what can we do to help? And for a start, most of the leaflets and the flyers were still sitting in the office, because essentially the publicity department were too scared to go to where the black people lived and actually go and talk to them. And you know, and she woman actually said to me, we left some tickets in the local Chinese takeaway, and that was their nod to diversity and marketing. But that was 10 years ago. I'm sure it's changed. Look, a final question from outside. I'm sorry, the audience. I don't mean outside. We're inclusive. We're embracing you all. This goes back to the first one about casting. I'm not sure that I've got this question right here, but let's see if you can interpret it for me. Another question, provocation around colorblind casting. So I'm assuming there's probably quite a lot of actors watching here, or people concerned with this. Interested in the panel's opinion on so-called blind casting an actor of Indian heritage in a part written by a white writer. Is that the character can then appear pasted on? Now, I'm not quite sure what that actually means, but I think I'm sort of vaguely aware of the territory we're talking about here. There's a bit of appropriation there. There's a bit of authenticity. Let's look at that sort of appropriation authenticity angle for a bit. And then we'll come back to our next steps bit. Anybody got any thoughts on that before I pick somebody?
Yeah,
yes, Rachel. Yes.
Quick comment. I mean, basically, I think if the white writer has done his or her research and has worked with the right people to get an authentic story, then I suppose you can't stop a writer from writing that. If they're impassioned to write about that and to have those characters, you can't really stop them from doing that. I mean, it is nice if you can have somebody from those communities to represent their story. That's the best way. We've got a similar case with the Bob Marley musical. I think that's come out as well. I mean, the book writer is not a black book writer. It's a white writer who's written about Bob Marley, but Bob Marley was mixed heritage anyway. So
and Dominic sort of became increasingly aware of his own, I don't know whether you'd say tenuous position, but strange position in that.
Yeah.
And I think they've came to from certainly talking amongst my colleagues, everybody seems to be happy with the situation. Dominic perhaps isn't that happy with it, but I'm sure he's been lauded quite well, and appreciated for that. And it's so I've just had another little note. So I should have said written as a white character. So interested. I'll go back to this question. So the casting, it's about the casting of an Indian actor as a white character. So yes.
Doesn't that go back to to me, the story that's being told? Then depending on the story that's being told, would dictate a relevance to race. And so, if it's a specific story that has to do with a specific culture and specific cultural attributes, then yeah, it might seem a little weird to have, the white person, I don't know, playing the mixed race Jamaican in the early 19th century. Or what's coming to mind is, as I said, I used to work a lot in opera, and opera, which is wildly mythical, but has, certain settings in specific places, has this ongoing crisis with a lot of white people playing Japanese, or, somebody playing Othello, or, if you start questioning everything, then you can have black soprano playing an 18th century Viennese, member of a royal house. But if it's about the story overall, if you're telling us particular aspect of relationships, of dealing with family issues, of striving through life and work and so on, it's not always, a big deal, I think, who plays what, as long as the story and the essence of the story is being told. The thing about colorblind casting, I was reading recently that, if just the very word colorblind means that you don't see me. Right. So that how can you ignore the fact that I'm black? If you're, it's all colorblind, but it's not, we're not looking at color. Well, then you don't see me, which means you don't recognize my story, and you don't recognize what from my story I can bring to the table. So maybe there should just be a different word, in that it's probably just a longer phrase. It doesn't matter what race you are, if you are able to tell the story, therefore, then it's okay, as opposed to colorblind. Because maybe the Indian person playing the white character, or the white person playing the Indian character, might still have something they can bring to the table to tell that particular story from their own. And
of course, we saw exactly that issue, and I wonder now whether the question is related to this, with the recent film of David Copperfield. Wasn't it David Copperfield? I mean, I was waiting for the torrent of sort of abuse and everything else. Actually, and it's interesting here, audiences and commentators often talk about the believing in the story or not believing in the story when they're talking about this. Whereas when we're actually making this, we talk about the world of the story. And this really, really very crucial difference. The world of the story is the world that we're creating on that stage or in front of the camera. And in that world, you know, all sorts of things can happen. You know, in that world, ghosts can appear. In that world, dragons can happen. In that world, all sorts of things can happen. And there was something about casting that actor in that role, in that film, an Indian actor, that said something. It just said just enough to make us look at the story slightly differently. It opened it out a bit more. And I have to say, casting a lot of the other actors in it as well. It created a world of that story. And I think that was really significant. Of course, we're seeing it in Hamilton. Benjamin, yeah.
Yeah, I think I could just add to what you both said in just saying that, for example, if that character, not David Copperfield, but another imaginary character was a white British man or a British white man, if you then change that ever so slightly and say a British Asian man or a black British man, then you're actually opening the door to so many more interesting nuances within the character. If that, I think that's one of the things that's really important now, is that we start to, as I said before, start to recognise culturally how we're different and culturally what brings us together. Because if we're all British, most of us are partly British at least, then there's that's what brings us together. But we also have our stories. We also have our individual family history and culture. And I just think, yeah, if you take this white character and ask an Indian person to play that character without taking in any of that other stuff into account, then that's when you're going to run into ridiculous things.
And I think that's a very good point on which to move back to that one question, which I've asked you all to have a little think about. We've lost Julie, unfortunately. She's had to go off to prepare for something. So this is the practical question. What is, if not the next step, what is a next step? Something that we can go away with, and perhaps build on. Just and I'd like to make you make a very practical one, rather than a sort of, you know, the next step is everybody's equal, and then we go on, you know, no. Rachel.
So I have one practical step to take, which I am working on, and which is what we are trying to do is put together a podcast really showcasing the array of talent that's out there in the music theatre world, and Benjamin is going to be part of that. We hope to launch that in the autumn sometime. So just speaking to people, just like we've done today. How did you get into it? What are you doing? Yeah, that's one practical step, just to show more of us.
Let the world know what's going on.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Excellent. That's a good one. Samira.
Well, being a writer, I mean, just having the energy and the confidence to just continue writing. I think when you're trying to create in an adverse environment, I think everyone should pat themselves on the back just for continuing on. So I'm doing that to myself right now. The thing that I would like to see happen is I would like producers and venue people, organizations who are in a position of power to get shows on, to you know, maybe write a statement of what they're kind of I don't know, like a mission statement with a target perhaps attached to it as to what they're doing to help make musical theatre more inclusive and diverse. I would like to see that page on everyone's website.
Okay, can I just jump in there and just say, I argued for almost exactly the opposite a few years ago,
Really?
because every Arts Council organisation, in order to get their funding, has to have a cultural diversity statement, and they always, and it's got to be in their business plan. And if they don't complete that statement, technically they don't get funding. And they all do the statement. You know, we promise to be good boys, and we all promise to do this, promise to do that. And very rarely do any of them actually achieve what's in that cultural diversity plan. And indeed, they only need to have the plan written out and printed in order to get their funding. And I argued a good 10 years ago that we should, this would be my next step, that we should abolish that plan. And we should have, the Arts Council should write the plan, and they should, and any organisation that doesn't achieve it in whichever way it can or cannot, should be cut. People were appalled, but I think that's, if you're serious about this, as people have been telling me since 1981, I may add, longer than many people who are at the Arts Council now have been at the Arts Council. If they're really serious about it, they will do it. So I applaud what you say, and perhaps if it comes from independent producers, that's a different thing.
I think it's also about being something that's measurable, so that people can be held accountable.
Yeah.
So it's not paying lip service to. It's more about, I am going to achieve X. Yeah. So out of my productions, this is what I'm going to achieve percentage-wise in terms of, I don't know, the inclusion, or out of all the productions that I'm going to develop, if I develop 10, 4 are going to be, be diverse. So it's like, it's measurable objectives that are absolutely, they have to be able to be accountable to. If there's no accountability, then there's no,
Good. Allyson.
Unmute myself. There we go. Repeat the question again. Exactly.
What is either the or a next step? A very practical next step. So for example, Rachel's podcast. It's a very practical next step that she's going to be doing. Samira's saying, personally, keep writing. Just keep writing. I've got to keep on achieving what I'm doing. And then perhaps from producers, a step would be to agree on a realizable, measurable mission statement, achievable mission statement.
All of those, and I think from the top down, to not, somebody had put in a previous question about fear, to not be afraid to admit that you might have been getting it wrong all this time, and to not be afraid to try to change the upper levels and how they look, to put more diverse, make your board more diverse, make makers more diverse, so that, when we're talking about accountability, we're not just talking to the same people all the time, and there will be different aspects to that accountability as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Benjamin.
I think one area, I think this idea of having a mission statement and to kind of enforce diversity, I think one area that we haven't spoken about is actually West End bands and theatre bands, theatre musicians, and that's another area where diversity is just lacking, really seriously lacking. And so I think that's probably quite an easy place where you say, look, just make here's a quota, half your band should be people of colour. That's not difficult to do, and you'll still have fantastic bands. You'll have maybe possibly even better bands. So that's something I'd like to see, and I'd also like to see some more stuff done in schools. I think that especially schools in areas where maybe music funding is not as much as it should be. And I personally I'd like to start doing a bit more of that. I'm going to start emailing my local schools, my old school. I'm going to go in there and see what I can do.
I mean, just a very practical thing. I suppose your first point about bands in the West End and theatres, presumably that's down to fixers and musical directors.
Absolutely. It's down to their networks, and you can't blame people for hiring people from their networks that they've worked.
Yeah.
But
So not always going to the same fixers, not always going to the same musical directors.
Absolutely, or just or speaking to fixers and saying, if you say to a fixer, "This is what you got to do," then they'll do it eventually. They will find the people because they'll have to. And so and what that brings is it starts the ball rolling. It's a snowball effect. Once people get the experience, they pass it on, and that's so far what's been happening. I've seen it lots of times where the musicians who are in these bands go and teach at private schools, mostly white kids. Those mostly white kids then realize they can do it and they study for it and they get the job. And it's just it's that kind of cycle. So it's just about breaking that up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Well, that's fantastic. There are a whole bunch of things there. I would just slightly develop that I was saying in response to Samara, which is I would, and this has been a bug of mine for ages, I would make sure that I would ask the Arts Council to enter into agreements individually with each of their clients. And those agreements should be about achievable and measurable goals. And they should move, and that should be their cultural diversity plan, and that plan should move from the back of their business plan to the front of their business plan, somewhere near the budget. Because as has been said many times, if a chief executive of a theatre fails in the budget, fails in bringing in enough money, they'll be sacked. If they fail in achieving the cultural diversity plan, nobody notices. So they should be achievable and they should be measurable, and they should be acted upon by both the organisation and the Arts Council subsequently to that. If they haven't achieved it the year before, then there should be a penalty. And there we go. So look, thank you very much, everybody. It's gone on for half an hour longer than we thought it had. It's quite possible that everybody at home has indeed gone home. We don't know. We may be talking to ourselves. I hope not. But I've really enjoyed it. Thank you very much, everybody. We will speak again, I'm sure. But thank you, Rachel Victor-Sampson, Allyson Devonish, Benjamin Burrell, Samira. Now, is it? I had your name with an A on the end. Srivastav. Good. And we lost Julie Clare, but thank you to Julie Clare as well. And do I hand everything back over to Emily and James? And thank you for all of you who are watching, or both of you who are watching, if that indeed is the case. Thank you.
And add huge thanks to Felix Cross as our chair. Thanks, Felix.
Thank you.
Thanks, Felix.
With great aplomb, a brilliant skill there. Thank you so much
full of plums.
Handling a very complex debate. And thank you to all of our panelists echoing Felix. We really love all of the brilliant ideas you brought to the discussion. And just a final action point, Samara and others mentioned the brilliant years of the Musical Theatre Initiative at Theatre Royal Stratford East. So MMD and MTN last year brought over Fred Carl and Robert Lee to work with another group of artists to try and keep some of that great work going. And we were talking just earlier today about how important that initiative is, and trying to continue to talk to them about getting their great expertise continuing to come over and help develop emerging artists of underrepresented heritages. So hopefully some of that initiative will continue to enrich the landscape of talent that we're all immersed in. But yes, thank you all so much. And if you're listening or watching this retrospectively on YouTube, by all means do get in touch with MMD or MTN. If you're a writer, a lyricist, a librettist, a book writer, do get in touch with MMD if you want to know more about entry points into the industry or talent development opportunities. If you're anything else, a director, a producer, an MD, a choreographer, anything else involved in development or staging of new musicals, do think about getting in touch with MTN. We'd love to talk to you and signpost and suggest places to get further information if you have questions about anything relating to new musical theatre. So onwards to the future. Thank you all of you for joining us at home and on the panel. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.